Hi everyone, my name is Asish and I am working as a MuleSoft developer in TGS Software Solution. So today we will be discussing about transaction management in MuleSoft. Let's understand what is transaction management. Transaction management is nothing but managing series of action result in a flow. Those results will be consistent irrespective of failures, known as transaction management. Now let's see the requirement where the transaction management can be helpful. Let's say the client is migrating the data from the local database to the cloud database, and the local database have all historical record as well as new records. And the requirement is like once the data is inserted in cloud database, we are updating the status in the local database as processed. And here, let's say, suppose in this scenario, while updating the database back, the database went down and we are not able to update the status. So if we are not able to update the status, when the next time the Mule application will be executed, then it will pull the same record, which will be a redundant data. To overcome this particular scenario, we can use transaction management. So whenever any error occurs before the transaction is completed, the entire transaction will be rolled back, which will helpful to overcome this particular scenario. So now let's see what are the types of transaction management we have in MuleSoft. We have two types of transactions. One is local and one is XA. We can use the local transaction when we are doing operation of a module belonging to the same module with the same configuration. And we can use the exit transaction management when we are using different modules or different configuration for the same module. Now let's see the difference between the local and exit transaction management. In local transaction management, the operation must support transactions. All operation inside the transaction must belong to the same connector. If we are using, like as I told before, if we are using multiple connectors of different modules, or if we are using the same modules connector, but the different configuration will be there, then the local transaction management will not support that particular transaction. And in local transaction, all operation must use the same configurations, and local transaction management does not support the nested transactions. Coming to the XA transaction, the operation must support transactions. And in XA transaction, all operation inside the transaction can belong to different connectors or different configurations. XA transaction is slower than the local, but it is more reliable as well. And XA supports the nested transactions. Now let's see what are the components or connectors can have support for transaction management. In MuleSoft, the database module, all the connectors in the database module support transactions. And coming to the JMS and VM, the listener, consume, and publish supports transaction management. And the tie scope is used for transaction management as well. Now let's see the transaction actions we have in MuleSoft. There are basically five transaction actions. One is always begin, who in which it always creates a new transaction. Second one is indifferent, which is basically no transaction is created. Then we have begin or join, where it creates a transaction or joins the existing transaction. Then we have not supported, where again it means there is no transaction supported. And then we have join if possible, which joins the existing transaction. Like if you are choosing the join if possible, it always joins the existing transaction. Now let's see a demo in the Anypoint Studio. Like there is a small use case I have prepared to show how transaction management works. So let's move to the Anypoint Studio. First, let me explain the requirement. So the requirement is like we have a database where multiple employees record are present. And then again, we have two more databases where we are storing certain data of the entire record we are getting. We are storing some data in first table and some data in the other table. Let me show the database, then it will be more clear. So you can see I have four different records. These are dummy data. I have four different records in consolidated data database table. Then I have a employees database table and I have a employees data database table. So in this database, you can see ID, department, salary, and designation are the columns. And in employees data, we have ID, location, name, and age as the column. And you can see all the columns are present in the consolidated data database table. So now let's go to the Anypoint Studio once more, and I will show the configuration. First, I'll be using the HTTP listener, where I can, yeah. So here you can see this is the listener configuration we have. Here I'm just using the default like HTTP all interfaces 8081 as the port, and the resource path is non-transaction, and here is a locker. And here in database configuration, you can see I have provided that particular local databases like JDBC driver I have provided. Host I have provided as local host, port is 3306, user is root, and password I have provided. I'm not providing the database here as it is a part of the query. So I'm not providing the database here. If you'll go back to the flow, then I have a transform message, and I'm using like I'm just converting the payload into a JSON format. As you can see, like there is a for each, because the select component will give a array as a response, and we want to store the data in two different tables. So I just want to send one data at a time. So I'm using the for each, and it will split. You can see the batch size is one, which will split the data into single objects. And in the transform message, I'm storing the payload into a variable named as data. And let's see the insert component. In the insert component, this is for the first table. If you'll see demo.employees, and here the SQL query is insert into the table with the column and the values, and the values will be populated from the parameter fields itself. And here you can see it is mapped to the variable. I'm like accessing that variable using var stored data, and then I'm just using the selector which is dot, and then I'm providing the key name where the data is residing. So I'm that's how I'm capturing the data, and it is getting stored in the database. Then we have a locker, and then we have the insert connector for the next database table. And all the database are using the same connector configuration as it is on the same database, like the same MySQL database. All the table resides in the same database. So I'm using the same connector configuration for all the database. Now, as I told, when we are normally doing an operation like database operation, we will select some data here, and we are sending the data into the first table. And in the second table, for a reason, this database server went down. Now, in the second table, the data will be not present. But if you'll see, the first table will have that particular data. So let's see a demo for that. Let me deploy this particular. I'll choose as debug. I'll add a breakpoint, and I will debug this particular Mule application. Let's wait till it is deployed. So in the meantime, I can show. So you can see the ID, name, age, department, designation, location, and salary. So if you'll see here, the department, salary, and designation is for the particular employee ID is like is going to store here, and here the location, name, and age will be stored. Now the ID, let's say for 002 ID, the department, salary, and designation got stored here, but the data is not present here, and we are using insert. So next time when the data hits it, the employee table, it will throw an error, as the ID is a primary key in this particular table, and will be not able to insert that particular data in any of the table. But always the 002 ID's data will be present here, but here we can't see that particular data. So I guess The deployment is done. Yeah, it's still deploying. Yeah, it is deployed. Now let's go to the Postman and fire a request. As you can see, I have already given the API path, which is HTTP localhost 8081 non-transaction. So now I will hit a send, and we can see we got the uh, debugger is active, and we got the control over the logger. We'll go to the next. We'll go to the next. Now, if you'll see here in the for each, we can see the entire payload, which is getting which we are getting from the database select component. And now the for each will split this data, and it will go one by one to the next components. And we are sending now the transfer message. The control is over transfer message. Now it hit the first insert, and the data will be inserted into the first table. Now the data is inserted into the first table. Let's check if it is inserted into the first table or not. So if I'll go here and I will run the query, you can see the data is inserted into the first table. Now let's hit the next. This the data is inserted into the second table. Let's check that. Yeah, we can see the data is inserted into the second table. Now the second record is getting processed. We can see here the payload is the ID is 002, which is the second record, and it is getting processed. Now the data is inserted into the first table. If you will go here and we'll see the data is inserted into the first table. But now what we'll be doing, we will stop the MySQL service so that we can check. Now, once we stop the service, the data, the second data will never, it will be not inserted into the database table. Now you can see there is an error, could not obtain connection from data source. Now when this entire for each will be error out, and we will get back a error response. You can see could not obtain the connection from data source. But if we'll go to the database, you can see in the employees table, we have two data. Okay, let me restart the MySQL server. Yeah, it is started. So if you'll see here in the employees table, yeah, you can see in the employees table we have two data, but in the employees data table we have only one data, where the second data is never inserted. Now if I'll run the same, now if I'll call the same API, now the when the second record will hit, it will error out. In the first record itself, it will error out because the first record is already present there. And as a duplicate key, it will throw an error. Let's check that. Yeah, you can see duplicate entry for 001, which means even if I'm sending the 002 also, it will fail in this particular table. So the data will never reach here. So this is the problem statement. Now to overcome this, we will be using transactions. So let me show you how I have configured the transactions. So it is similar kind of setup. You can see the select component is there, the transfer message is there. Now to iterate over the data, I'm using the for each, and then we have a try scope, and the transaction action is always begin. So this try scope will make sure that always a new transaction will begin. And then we have transform message. We are converting the data into a JSON payload. Then we have the insert component where we are inserting the data into the database. And if we'll go to the advanced section, here I am using transactional action. It is join as join if possible. So let's make it as always join. And here I am inducing one delay. So I don't think the delay is needed. So let me delete this, and you can see here the transaction action we have made as always join, and here also we will make the transaction action as always join. Yeah, here the transaction action is always join. Let's save it. It will be redeployed. And in the meantime, let's delete the data from the sales database. Yeah, you can see the database, both the database were truncated, and once it is the application is deployed, we can start with the debug again. Okay, the application is deployed. Now we will be calling this particular flow, and you can see here in the HTTP listener, here we have the resource path or relative path as transaction. So let's go to the Postman once again, and I'll choose the transaction one. Here I have already configured the, like already I have given the API path. Let's hit the request. Yeah, and we can see the control came here, and we will go to the next component where it is select, and it will select the data on the basis of query, which is basically selecting all the data. It is going to give us all the data present in that particular table. And if you can see here, all the four data are present: 001 ID, 002 ID, 003 ID, and 004 ID. Now let's move to the next component, which is our try scope. And here the first data 001 is present. If I'll go to the next component, this is like where we are setting a variable vash data, and here the payload will be stored in the variable, and we will hit the next component, and it will go to the database, and once we hit the next, it will be inserted into the database. Now let's see in the database if it is inserted or not. So as I told, if the transaction is working perfectly fine, so the data will be not here. Once that transaction is completed completely, then only the data will be reflected here. Let's see if the data is reflecting here or not. As you can see, there is no data already. Here the database connector is executed, but there is no data present in the first database table. Now let's go to the next database table, and we will try to execute it. Now the second database insert, like the insert component is executed for the second database table. Now let's see in the first database table, do we have the data or not? Yeah, you can see in the first database table, we have 001, and in the second database table, also we have 001. Let's hit the next. Now it is inserted into the second record is inserted into the first database table. Now let's stop the service. The MySQL service is stopped. If I'll try to like execute the next insert component, so it will throw an error, the communication link failure, and it is not able to communicate with the database. Let's think like it is like the database server went down, and it will error out the complete flow. Now let's see the previously when we have inserted the data, the second record was present in the first table, but it never went to the second table. But in this scenario, if the transaction is working perfectly fine, the second record will be never present in the first table itself. Like the data is sent, but it will be rolled back automatically from here. If I will hit it. Okay, so I need to restart the server. Let me start it once again. Yeah. Okay, it is started. If you'll see here, the data, the second data is not present. The second record 002 is not present here because while inserting into the second table, employees data table, the like the communication was broken. it was like the Mule application is not able to establish the communication with the database. For that, the data in the first table itself is rolled back completely. So that's how transaction management is working in MuleSoft. So here I'm only using the local transaction management. If you want, you can use multiple configuration for different database, and you can make use of extra transaction also. So that's all about this video. Thank you for joining.